So, picture this. You are looking at this, like, giant, sprawling mural.
Okay.
And on the left side of this image, the whole color palette is just dark. It's chaotic. It's kind of suffocating, honestly.
Like a dystopian vibe.
Exactly, yeah. You see this caricature of a political figure, and he's sitting comfortably on a throne that's made entirely of money. Like, literally hoarding wealth.
Wow. Very subtle.
Right. Not subtle at all. And below him, the canvas is just filled with this nightmare of modern urban decay. Gridlock traffic, endless rows of these exhaust-spewing buses, thick pollution physically choking the air.
I can picture it.
And there's this prominent sign pointing to something labeled VIP culture. It shows a few elites completely bypassing the misery, skipping the massive physical cues the general public is stuck in.
It's an incredibly visceral, like almost heavy-handed depiction of just systemic compounding failure.
It really is. And the focal point of this dark side is a long, winding line of young people. They're carrying these heavy suitcases, their postures are just totally exhausted, and they're walking single file toward a departure gate. It's a literal exodus.
Right.
But then right in the middle of this mural, separating the canvas, there's a massive, imposing brick wall. And two figures are mid-swing, literally smashing through that brick with heavy sledgehammers.
And one of those figures wielding a sledgehammer is drawn to represent Rabi Lamichhane, right?
Clay.
Who is, well, he's a very prominent central face in the political movement we're actually examining today.
Yeah, he is. So as they smash through this wall, the bricks are crumbling, and they are revealing the right side of the mural. And the contrast is just blinding.
Like a totally different world.
Completely. The dark, polluted chaos immediately gives way to this pristine, sunlit, highly engineered utopia.
Oh, wow.
You see clean rivers, modern multi-lane highways looping gracefully through this lush landscape. There are wind turbines, massive arrays of solar panels just soaking up energy.
A green tech paradise, basically.
Exactly. Cable cars gliding up the Himalayas, thriving agriculture. It is like stepping out of a cyberpunk novel straight into, a highly curated green tech utopia.
It's a really striking visual metaphor. And, what makes it so fascinating is that it isn't just like fan art on the internet.
No, not a good.
It is actually the final culminating image, the closing argument, basically, of the foundational document we are exploring today.
So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are unpacking a document called the Bacha Patra 2079. Translated, that means the pledge letter, or the manifesto of Nepal's Rastriya Swatantra Party.
Which translates to the National Independent Party.
Right, though we will probably just refer to them today by their widely used acronym, the RSP.
Yeah, RSP is easier. And, as we'll discover, treating this text as just a standard run-of-the-mill political pamphlet would be a huge mistake.
Oh, absolutely.
Because what we are looking at structurally, linguistically, and strategically is essentially a comprehensive startup pitch deck.
A pitch deck for a country.
Exactly. But instead of pitching like a new app or a delivery service, it's a pitch designed to completely overhaul the physical, economic, and social infrastructure of a sovereign nation.
They are literally proposing a total operating system upgrade for an entire country. Now, before we get into the heavy machinery of how they actually plan to do this, I want to make something crystal clear to you, the listener.
Very important point here.
Our mission today is an impartial, objective analysis of the ideas presented in this original source material.
Right.
We're not taking a political side. We are not endorsing the RSP, and we are not criticizing other political parties in Nepal.
Precisely. Our role is strictly analytical. We're just exploring the policy ideas, the rhetoric, the economic blueprints, and the proposed social reforms exactly as they are written and framed in this document.
We just want to understand the architecture of this specific political perspective, testing its internal logic and exploring what it actually implies.
Right.
So here is how we are going to navigate this blueprint today. We're going to start by looking at the origins and the philosophical foundation of this movement. Like, why did this document emerge at this specific moment in time?
Because timing is everything.
It really is. From there, we will examine their citizen's contract, which is a deeply unusual approach to political promises.
Very unusual.
Then we'll dissect their strategy for what they call a technological and economic leapfrog. We'll debate their proposed radical social and administrative reforms, which they title the 100 Departures. And finally, we'll look at how they aim to completely reimagine the physical environment of the nation.
And the visual of those sledgehammers breaking down the wall, I think that's the perfect starting point.
Yeah, for sure.
Because every startup pitch, whether you are trying to build a better rideshare company or, a better government, it always begins by identifying the core pain point.
You have to diagnose the disease before you can convince the public to swallow your specific cure. So let's look at that diagnosis. The manifesto outlines the reasons why that wall exists in the first place. Through a section it calls the 10 glimpses of the current state of the nation. And they do not pull their punches.
No, the language is severe. It paints a picture of a nation in just acute distress.
They highlight that unprecedented exodus of youth that we saw in the cartoon. They describe a deeply entrenched culture of political syndicates.
Yeah.
They point to systemic corruption that touches absolutely every level of society, a massive digital divide leaving the country behind globally, and essentially a total fundamental breakdown of the basic contract between the state and the citizen.
And the text is very pointed in its historical critique, too. I mean, it argues that for over 3 decades, the traditional political mechanisms have basically stopped operating as democratic institutions.
What have they become then?
Well, according to the document, they function more like cartels. They
Yeah.
frequently use terms like nepotism, impunity, and institutionalized exploitation. Yeah, the argument here isn't just about a few bad policies or a few corrupt individuals. The manifesto makes the case that the political culture itself is fundamentally toxic and designed solely for self-preservation.
Which perfectly sets the stage for their inciting incident. The manifesto details how the RSP emerged in the year 2022 or the year 2079 in the Bikram Sambot calendar.
Right.
But it's very careful about how it describes its own genesis. It doesn't frame its creation as just, a group of people deciding to form another political party. The text explicitly calls its formation an inevitable citizen rebellion.
And that specific phrasing, inevitable citizen rebellion, is crucial to understanding their self-image.
How so?
Well, they're framing their existence not as a political choice, but as a necessary, almost physical reaction to decades of misrule. They position the party as the structural release valve for immense, boiling public pressure that just had nowhere else to go.
And the document is very clear about where a huge portion of that pressure is coming from. It explicitly credits Gen Z and the younger generations.
Yep.
It talks about youth protests. It references young people who have faced state violence, using this really evocative language like youth with bullets in their chests who are out in the streets demanding fundamental change.
They also anchor this narrative of rebellion to a very specific, tangible event, which is interesting.
Oh, right, the mayoral race.
Exactly. The text highlights the independent electoral victory of a figure named Balen, who ran outside the traditional party structure and won the mayoralty of the capital city, Kathmandu.
So why is that mayoral race so central to a national party's manifesto? I mean, it's just one city.
Because that victory in Kathmandu served as the ultimate proof of concept. For decades, the conventional wisdom was that the legacy parties, with their massive networks and deep pockets, they were unbeatable.
Right, you just couldn't win without the machine.
Exactly. But the mayoral victory showed that a new, citizen-centric, non-traditional political force wasn't just a theoretical idea discussed in coffee shops. It was electorally viable.
It actually worked.
It proved mathematically that the public was hungry for a stark alternative to the established system.
That makes total sense. And that opens the door for the party leader, Rabi Lamichhane. The manifesto leans heavily into his specific transition into politics.
Yeah, his background is key.
Because before this, he was a very prominent, highly visible television journalist. He was known for directly exposing corruption on air, confronting bureaucrats, and basically acting as a one-man grievance hotline for the general public.
Right.
And then he just steps out of the television studio, puts down the microphone, and enters the political arena.
It's a fascinating trajectory that the document leverages heavily. As a journalist, he was already a trusted figure for investigating the system's failures from the outside.
Yeah, he was the guy calling it out.
Right, so the party's core premise, built on his persona, essentially says, look, we have spent years showing you the rot from the outside. We have documented the failure. Now, give us the legislative mandate to go inside and clean it out.
As I read through this origin story, I couldn't stop comparing it to the business world. The text continually frames the traditional political parties as these legacy monopoly corporations.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Think of massive, slow-moving telecommunications companies or like legacy airlines that have completely stopped innovating because they just control the entire market. They don't have to be good. They just have to be the only option.
And that is exactly what the manifesto means by syndicates.
Exactly.
Because a syndicate eliminates competition, which, eliminates the need for efficiency or customer service.
And into this stagnant market comes the RSP, positioning itself as a disruptive tech startup trying to hack the system. They use all the vocabulary of disruption. They talk about efficiency, service delivery, and accountability.
Yep.
It really feels like they aren't just trying to win an election to pass a few laws. They are trying to replace the country's entire operating system.
But that raises the central tension of the entire document and really of their entire political project. Well, is it actually possible to disrupt a deeply entrenched, deeply complex political landscape the same way you disrupt the taxi industry with an app?
Right. Politics is a bit messier than Uber.
Slightly. To do that, you need more than just frustration. You need a highly specific ideology. So how does this document define its theoretical foundation? Because historically, when a movement claims to be a radical, tear-it-all-down disruption, they tend to lean heavily toward the ideological extremes.
Yeah, either hyper-capitalist libertarianism or staunchly state-controlled socialism.
But what stands out immediately in their theoretical foundation section is the explicit rejection of those extremes.
Interesting.
Their ideological base is surprisingly synthesized. They state unequivocally that they are committed to a pluralistic democracy. Economically, they advocate for a liberal economy, which means they support free markets, robust competition, and the strict protection of private property.
So on the surface, a very pro-business, capitalist approach designed to generate wealth.
Yes, but they attach a massive caveat to that capitalism. They define their stance as a liberal economy with social justice. They heavily employ the language of state welfare, introducing this concept of constitutional socialism.
Constitutional socialism.
Okay.
Okay, wait. How do they reconcile those two opposing forces? Because free markets and socialism don't usually hang out in the same room.
They attempt to merge them by arguing that you need the ruthless efficiency, innovation, and wealth generation of a free market to build the economy.
Okay.
But, they argue, leaving that wealth entirely to the free market results in the very syndicates and hoarding they are fighting against.
The guy on the throne of money in the mural.
Exactly. Therefore, they want the state to step in heavily, using the wealth generated by the free market to ensure equitable distribution, to protect the marginalized, and to fund robust public services like health and education.
So if I'm understanding this, they want to bake the economic cake using the heat of capitalism, but they want to slice it up and distribute it using the principles of socialism.
That's a great way to put it.
The diagnosis is that the old system is a corrupt monopoly, and their proposed theory is a balanced, highly efficient, wealth-generating welfare state.
But, promising a perfect balance of wealth generation and social equity is something almost every political party does in their pamphlets.
It's true. Every politician promises the moon.
Right. The critical challenge the RSP faces is the massive trust deficit they diagnosed in their own 10 glimpses.
Exactly. If the voter fundamentally believes that all politicians are liars, which is literally the premise of their citizen rebellion, how does this new party actually convince the voter that they won't just get into power and become another disappointment?
And they attempt to solve this deeply ingrained trust deficit by offering something highly unusual in political literature: a literal contract.
This brings us to the Nagariko Karar, the citizen's contract. When I was reviewing the source material, this honestly stopped me in my tracks.
Yeah, it's bold.
This isn't just buried in the text as a list of lofty goals or, vague campaign promises. The document actually features a formally structured, signed pledge by the party leadership.
It is deliberately formatted to mimic a legal and moral agreement between the party leadership and the individual voter.
And the terms they agree to are intense. The leadership signs this document stating that if they gain a majority government and fail to deliver on a specific set of promises within 5 years, they agree to face political punishment.
Basically, they fire themselves.
Yes. They formally pledged not to seek office again. They are putting their political careers on the line, in writing, attached to specific metrics.
Think about the psychological impact of presenting a political platform as a binding legal or financial document. In traditional patronage-based politics, the voter is often conditioned to act as a supplicant.
Wait, a supplicant meaning someone who has to, beg the powerful politician for a basic necessity. Please, powerful leader, build a paved road for our village.
Precisely. The power dynamic is entirely top-down. But by issuing a formal contract, the RSP is attempting to radically shift the voter's mindset.
How so?
The voter is no longer a supplicant. The voter becomes a shareholder. The politician is reframed as a CEO who has been hired to execute a specific, measurable business plan. If the CEO doesn't hit the key behind performance indicators, the KPIs, the shareholders have the contractual right and duty to fire them.
That is a total paradigm shift in the mechanics of civic duty. It's politics framed as a service-level agreement, an SLA.
Yes.
Like if you sign up for enterprise cloud hosting, the company guarantees 99.9% server uptime or they automatically refund your money. The RSP is trying to offer a political uptime guarantee.
And to make an SLA work, you need highly specific measurable targets. You can't just be vague. The Nagariko Karar outlines 5 core priorities, their top 5 KPIs for the nation.
Let's dissect these 5 priorities because, man, they scale up in ambition very quickly. Priority number 1 is integrity and good governance, and their catchphrase here is no line, online.
It is highly effective messaging because it directly addresses one of the most visible, universally frustrating aspects of state failure in developing nations, which is the physical queue.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyone listening to this has likely experienced the profound frustration of a poorly managed DMV or a passport office.
Right.
Now imagine that level of inefficiency for every single interaction with the state. The physical line is the ultimate symbol of bureaucratic decay.
And it's also where corruption breeds. Because when the line is 6 hours long, people will pay a middleman to skip it.
Exactly. So their contractual promise is zero tolerance for that friction. They are promising the complete end-to-end digitization of public services. No physical offices for basic needs, no middlemen. You authenticate and process everything securely from your smartphone.
Which leads to priority number 2, and this is where the economic ambition really reveals itself. Middle-class expansion, and they put hard, highly specific financial numbers on this contract. They state they are targeting an average per capita income of $3,000 within 7 years. And alongside that, they aim to build a $100 billion national economy.
Okay, we need to pause and examine the gravity of those numbers. To put a $100 billion economy in context for Nepal, that would require a massive, sustained, and totally unprecedented acceleration of their historical economic growth rate.
Yeah, it is not an incremental step, it is an exponential leap.
Priority 3 focuses heavily on jobs, and it directly ties back to that opening visual of the youth exodus we talked about.
Right, the line of people leaving.
The manifesto's goal is to transition the workforce from informal, precarious, often dangerous labor into formal, safe, and inclusive domestic jobs. They specifically highlight 4 primary sectors to absorb this labor: IT, construction, tourism, and agriculture.
Then priority 4 is connectivity, again, tying themselves to specific metrics. They promise the construction of 30,000 kilometers of national highways.
That is a lot of road.
It really is. Plus, the generation of 15,000 megawatts of electricity and the completion of 10 what they call signature mega projects.
And finally, priority 5 zeroes in on the diaspora. And this is absolutely crucial to their strategy because a massive portion of Nepal's population, and particularly its working-age youth, currently resides and works abroad.
Right.
The manifesto pledges to utilize this globally dispersed Nepali human capital. They promise the implementation of online voting so the diaspora finally has a direct political voice, and the creation of a sovereign diaspora fund to securely channel external wealth back into domestic infrastructure.
Okay, so I see the appeal of this framework. It's clean, it's measurable, and it sounds incredibly modern.
I hear a but coming.
But as an impartial analyst, I have to challenge the reality of this contract. You're looking at a document that promises to build a $100 billion economy and hit $3,000 per capita in just 7 years.
Yeah.
At the exact same time, they are promising to completely overhaul a massive, stubborn bureaucratic structure, fight deeply entrenched systemic corruption that's existed for decades, and digitize an entire nation where a digital divide still exists.
It's a lot all at once.
We have to ask, is this an actual mathematically sound economic model they've presented? Or is this the political equivalent of a startup CEO promising investors like, we'll have flying cars by next Tuesday just to secure the initial funding?
That's a fair point. How do they reconcile the strict, literal legality of a citizen's contract with the near impossibility of these macroeconomic figures?
That is the most significant vulnerability of the document. If you frame your promises as a binding contract, you invite strict audits. And the mathematical reality is that if you are a developing nation heavily reliant on exporting raw human labor, you do not organically multiply your GDP by that factor in under a decade.
Right. Not without discovering massive, easily exportable natural resources like oil or something.
Right. Exactly. So the RSP's internal logic seems to rely on the belief that the current system is so artificially suppressed by corruption and inefficiency that simply removing the syndicate will result in an immediate, explosive release of trapped economic potential.
They are betting that corruption isn't just a tax on the economy, it's a dam blocking the entire river.
Precisely. But you are entirely correct to point out the extreme difficulty of execution. To even approach that $100 billion target, you absolutely cannot rely on traditional linear economic growth
Right,
models.
you can't just build a few more factories or export a bit more agriculture.
You need a massive, disruptive economic pivot. You have to change what the country fundamentally does.
Which transitions us perfectly into their strategy for doing exactly that. Because you can't promise a $100 billion economy if your main export is human labor. The math simply doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
This forces the RSP to answer a massive question. How do you completely skip the traditional industrial revolution and jump straight to a modern digital one? Because that is exactly what their Nepal 2.0 strategy attempts to outline.
Yeah, the Nepal 2.0 really is tech startup branding.
Totally. And when you look at their 100 policy departures, this exhaustive list of specific policy shifts, technology isn't treated as just one sector among many. It is the central engine for their entire macroeconomic strategy.
And there's a good reason for that. They recognize a harsh geopolitical and geographic reality. Nepal is entirely landlocked. It's sandwiched between two massive, aggressive economic powerhouses, India and China.
Right.
Trying to compete in traditional heavy manufacturing and physical export is logistically and economically brutal without a seaport. So they have to ask, what high-value product doesn't require a seaport? What doesn't get stuck at a physical border checkpoint?
Data,
Yeah.
software, digital services, intellectual property.
Exactly. The manifesto outlines a comprehensive goal to transform Nepal into a global IT hub. And the number they attach to this specific sector is staggering. A $50 billion tech export target within a decade.
Wait, 50 billion. So half of their entire proposed economy is supposed to be generated by tech exports.
Yep.
That is huge. Let's dig into the mechanisms of how they actually plan to physically manifest that. Because, you don't just declare yourself an IT hub and suddenly Google opens a headquarters in Kathmandu.
No, you have to build the ecosystem.
Right. They propose deep structural changes. First, they want to create a sovereign IT board. And the text makes it clear this wouldn't just be a minor advisory department buried in some ministry. It would be a powerful, autonomous entity designed specifically to cut through bureaucratic red tape and rapidly approve tech initiatives.
And they pair that structural change with highly targeted immigration policies. They explicitly outline the introduction of digital nomad visas.
Oh, this is fascinating. Think about how this changes the calculus if you are a listener right now.
Yeah, put yourself in those shoes.
Right. If you are a software developer or a graphic designer or a consultant listening to this from an apartment in London or Berlin or San Francisco, the RSP is actively writing national policy to lure you to the Himalayas.
They want to attract global tech talent to live and spend money in Nepal.
Exactly. They're promising to build the necessary infrastructure, high-speed, reliable internet, and state-of-the-art co-working spaces to support you.
It is an incredibly modern lifestyle pitch. They're leveraging their greatest natural asset, their geography and natural beauty, but repurposing it for the 21st century. Instead of just selling a 2-week trekking holiday, they are trying to sell the Himalayas as the ultimate long-term remote work destination.
It reminds me heavily of the historical precedent set by countries like Estonia.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
Because after the Soviet Union collapsed, Estonia looked at the global landscape and realized they were decades behind in traditional industrial infrastructure. They didn't try to catch up by building massive steel mills or car factories.
No, they didn't have the time or resources for that.
Right. They leapfrogged the Industrial Revolution entirely and beamed their society straight into the cloud. They digitized their government, their banking, their residency, and they became a European tech powerhouse.
The Estonia model is the exact blueprint the RSP is attempting to adapt for South Asia. But, to make that model work, you have to aggressively remove the friction that prevents digital commerce.
What kind of friction?
For instance, a critical mechanism detailed in the manifesto is the pledge to finally implement a seamless international payment gateway.
Okay, let's explain why that is so vital. Because if you live in the US or Europe, you take Stripe, PayPal, or seamless wire transfers for granted. You don't even think about it.
Exactly.
But if you are a freelance coder or a startup founder in many developing nations, Simply getting paid by a client in New York or London is a massive regulatory and technical nightmare. The fees are exorbitant, the money gets held up, and the banking regulations just treat you with suspicion.
And removing that barrier doesn't just help existing businesses, it unleashes immense latent entrepreneurial energy. If you can code it, you can finally get paid for it easily.
It changes everything.
Furthermore, they propose a radical tax incentive, a maximum tax rate of just 1% for foreign investment brought in specifically by the IT sector.
1%. That's basically free.
Right. They are not just opening the door, they are aggressively rolling out a red carpet made of tax breaks to lure global tech capital away from other regional hubs.
But their economic leapfrog isn't entirely confined to the digital space. They also have to address the physical reality of their current economy. The manifesto outlines a transition to a waste-to-wealth model, focusing heavily on recycling, upcycling, and establishing a circular economy.
Which is great for sustainability.
Absolutely. But the most significant economic pivot they propose is shifting the nation away from being a remittance-dependent economy to what they call a production and export economy.
And we really need to underline how massive a shift this is.
Yeah, please do.
Remittance, the money sent home by citizens working abroad in places like the Gulf states or Malaysia, is currently the absolute lifeblood of the Nepali economy. It props up the GDP. But it is a deeply precarious, emotionally taxing, and ultimately unsustainable economic foundation.
You are essentially exporting your strongest, youngest citizens and living off the checks they send back.
Exactly. It hollows out the country.
Right.
So the manifesto proposes a very specific mechanism to change this dynamic. They pledge to mandate that 30% of the capital acquired from foreign employment be channeled directly into national priority projects.
Wait, how does that work practically? Are they taxing the remittance at 30%? Because that would be incredibly unpopular.
No, the text suggests it's more about creating investment vehicles.
Okay.
Rather than that money simply flowing back into the country and being spent immediately on imported consumer goods, which actually drains the national reserves, they want to channel that capital into sovereign bonds or investment funds dedicated to building domestic infrastructure.
I see.
They want to turn passive, consumptive remittance into active wealth-generating capital investment.
That is a brilliant financial mechanism, honestly. If they can convince the diaspora to actually trust the government with their money. Huge if. Which loops right back to the necessity of the citizens' contract and the anti-corruption pledges we talked about.
Right.
But let's extrapolate further. Let's look at the harsh physical reality of running a digital economy. Because you cannot have a $50 billion IT export industry. You cannot host thousands of digital nomads. You cannot run massive server farms. And you cannot have a fully digitized, no-line online government if the power goes out.
Nope. You cannot run a tech hub on rolling blackouts.
Exactly. Which brings us to the bedrock of their entire Nepal 2.0 vision, which is energy infrastructure. This is why their pledges regarding electricity generation are so massive.
Earlier, we mentioned their contractual goal of generating 15,000 to 30,000 megawatts of electricity within a decade. Let's talk about how they actually plan to generate that power. Because Nepal's geography provides immense, largely untapped hydroelectric potential due to its massive river systems flowing down from the Himalayas.
Right. Hydro is the obvious choice there.
The RSP Manifesto aims to aggressively harness this through mega projects. But what is notable is that they look beyond traditional hydro. They explicitly incorporate emerging green technologies, specifically mentioning the utilization and production of hydrogen energy.
Green hydrogen, that is the cutting edge of clean energy tech. It really shows they're trying to position the country not just as a consumer of legacy tech, but as a participant in the future energy market.
Absolutely.
But, the energy policy that stood out to me as having the most immediate impact on the average citizen is their proposal for net metering.
Oh, yeah. Let's explain the mechanics of net metering, because it fundamentally alters the relationship between the citizen and the state grid.
Right. So under a net metering system, if I install solar panels on the roof of my house, I generate my own electricity. During a sunny day, my panels might generate significantly more power than my house actually uses. So instead of that excess energy just being wasted, it flows backward into the national power grid. The electric meter on my house literally runs in reverse.
Right.
The government grid absorbs my extra power, and they effectively credit my account or even pay me for the electricity I provided to them.
It is a profound policy shift. It completely decentralizes power generation. It transforms every single residential household, every school, and every business from a passive consumer of state resources into an active potential micropower plant.
It builds incredible resilience into the system, too. If one massive power plant goes offline, the grid doesn't just collapse because thousands of rooftops are feeding power into the system. This is exactly how you build the kind of deep energy redundancy required to support a $50 billion digital infrastructure.
But, as mathematically elegant as this tech and energy vision is, it faces a severe sociological hurdle.
What's that?
Well, an upgraded, digitized economy is completely useless and often dangerous if the social fabric of the country is deeply fractured.
That is the historical trap, isn't it? Economic growth driven by technology without intentional social cohesion usually just leads to violently wider inequality.
Exactly. The tech elites get richer and the working class gets priced out of their own cities.
Right. So we have to examine how this highly technocratic manifesto addresses the messy human reality of historical inequalities, deep-rooted corruption, and the massive drain of human capital. This brings us to the social reforms rewriting the social fabric. And I really think we have to start with point one of their 100 departures, because it carries profound weight.
Yeah, if you look at their exhaustive list of 100 policy departures, the very first point, the tip of the spear, is not about GDP. It's not about taxes, and it's not about technology.
What is it?
It is a commitment to issue a formal state apology to the Dalit community.
For listeners who might not be intimately familiar with the region's sociology, the Dalit community has historically faced severe systemic discrimination, the practice of untouchability, and deep economic and social exclusion over generations.
It's a dark history.
It is. And the manifesto pledges not just a rhetorical apology, but a formal acknowledgement of this deep historical injustice alongside the implementation of stringent, unforgiving, anti-discrimination laws.
Right.
Let's just sit with that for a second. Because usually in these highly modern, forward-looking political pitch decks, the past is entirely ignored. The focus is always look forward, look at the tech.
Why do you think they positioned a historical social apology as the absolute first departure from the status quo?
Placing this as point number one is a massive, deliberate statement of foundational values.
Yeah.
The RSP is signaling an understanding that a society cannot sustainably leapfrog into a high-tech future if massive segments of its population are anchored to the past by systemic discrimination.
Economic innovation requires intellectual freedom and social mobility. Exactly. By starting with this apology, they are attempting to establish a moral baseline and heal a deeply fractured social fabric before attempting to build a new economic engine on top of it.
It's an acknowledgement that human infrastructure is just as critical as digital infrastructure.
Very well said.
But immediately after establishing that moral high ground, they bring out the heavy legislative artillery regarding corruption. And their proposals here are highly aggressive.
The anti-corruption measures they detail are designed to be actively hostile to the old guard. They pledge to establish a high-level, independent judicial commission with the explicit mandate to investigate all major corruption cases post-1990.
Let's look at the scope of that. Post-1990. That is opening up over 30 years of political and administrative history.
A huge undertaking.
They are declaring an intent to forensically examine every major public scandal, every shady infrastructure deal, and every unexplained accumulation of wealth for the last 3 decades. And the document explicitly promises to confiscate illicitly gained wealth and return it to the state treasury.
But the mechanism that gives this real teeth is their pledge to completely abolish the statute of limitations on corruption cases.
Meaning, you can never just run out the clock. In many systems, if you steal public funds and manage to hide it or stall the courts for 10 or 15 years, you are legally safe.
Right, you get away with it.
But the RSP is proposing that if you stole public money 20 years ago, you remain legally liable today, tomorrow, and forever.
It is a direct existential threat to the established political and bureaucratic elite. It is the legislative manifestation of those sledgehammers breaking down the wall.
And speaking of breaking the system, we have to discuss their policy on depoliticization, because this is perhaps their most radical administrative proposal.
Oh, definitely.
The manifesto proposes completely banning political trade unions in government offices, in public schools, and in universities.
This targets the very mechanics of how traditional political parties maintain their grip on power.
How does that work?
Well, in many developing democracies, legacy political parties use affiliated trade unions within the civil service, the police, and the education sectors, not as advocates for workers' rights, but as loyal foot
Like a
soldiers.
patronage network.
Yes, they function as deep patronage networks. If a party doesn't get its way in parliament, it can order its affiliated teachers' union or civil servants' union to strike, effectively paralyzing the entire state apparatus.
Okay, this is where I must play the ultimate skeptic. I'm looking at this from a pure implementation and survival standpoint.
Go for it.
Banning political unions in schools and government offices sounds incredibly clean and efficient on a PDF document.
Yeah.
It is the ultimate startup mentality, just delete the inefficiency.
Right.
But if you look at how these bureaucracies are actually built, the unions aren't just an add-on feature. They are woven into the very fabric of the state. It is not like swapping out a broken car engine. It is like looking at 30 years of legacy spaghetti code in a massive critical software system.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
You think you are just deleting one bad line of code, the corrupt union, but that line is inextricably linked to the payroll system, the grading system, the daily administration of thousands of offices. If you delete it forcefully, the entire server crashes.
It's true.
How does the manifesto address the reality that pulling this thread will trigger monumental pushback? You are threatening the livelihoods and the power of the very people who have to process your paperwork.
You have correctly identified the most volatile friction point in their entire platform. The pushback would indeed be monumental. Attempting to dismantle these networks would likely trigger massive administrative sabotage, coordinated strikes, and severe political warfare.
They would shut the government down.
Exactly. The internal bureaucracy would actively fight them at every single step.
So how does a new disruptive party survive that kind of internal immune response? If the teachers won't teach and the clerks won't stamp the documents, where does the RSP get the leverage to force the change?
This is exactly why their diaspora strategy is not just about economics. It is about political survival.
Oh, interesting.
Because they know the domestic establishment will fight them tooth and nail, they are looking outward for their leverage. By heavily involving the diaspora, they are essentially trying to import external accountability, external capital, and external voting blocks to bypass the domestic gridlock.
Let's dissect that diaspora strategy because it is a fascinating hack of the democratic system. The manifesto proposes giving non-resident and Talis NRNs, people living and working abroad, a clear path to dual citizenship.
The text notes there would be some political exceptions, meaning a dual citizen might be barred from holding high executive offices like prime minister or president to prevent conflicts of interest.
Which makes sense.
But they would retain deep legal, economic, and civic ties to the nation.
And they pair that citizenship with the promise of online voting. If they actually implement secure online voting for millions of citizens living abroad.
They completely rewrite the electoral map overnight.
Think about the math. The local ward boss, the traditional politician who relies on a local patronage network, handing out a few jobs or paving a local road to secure a block of votes, suddenly has absolutely zero leverage over a software engineer working in Sydney or a construction worker in Qatar.
Right.
The diaspora voter is not beholden to local favors. They vote based on macroeconomic policy, national pride, and digital efficiency.
It decentralizes political power on a global scale. And the RSP pairs this electoral shift with what they call a brain gain initiative.
Brain gain, I like that.
They don't just want the diaspora's remittance money. They want their skills, their global experience, and crucially, their elevated expectations.
That's the key right there. If you have spent 5 years living in Tokyo or London or Seoul, you have experienced how a highly functioning digital state operates.
Right.
The RSP wants those citizens to look back at Nepal and demand the exact same level of service and efficiency from their own government. They're using the diaspora to artificially raise the standards of the domestic electorate.
It's a very clever mechanism. We also need to touch on how they plan to reform the domestic social engine, which is education, because their proposals here are equally disruptive to the status quo. The manifesto proposes implementing a voucher system for education. The underlying philosophy they state is money follows the student.
Let's explain the mechanics of a voucher system for those who might not know. In a traditional model, the government allocates a massive lump sum budget directly to a public school, regardless of how well that school performs.
Right. The school gets the money either way.
But under a voucher system, the state takes that same educational funding, breaks it up, and gives it directly to the families in the form of an educational voucher. The family then has the power to choose which school, public or private, they want to send their child to, and they hand the voucher to that school.
And then the school redeems the voucher with the state for cash.
Exactly.
By doing this, they introduce ruthless free market competition into the education sector.
Suddenly, the principal of a public school has to actually compete for students.
Right.
If the school is failing, if the teachers are absent, the parents will simply take their voucher to a better school down the road.
The failing school loses its funding and is forced to either improve or shut down.
It breaks the monopoly of the local failing school.
It is the ultimate blending of their constitutional socialism theory. The state provides the welfare, the funding for the education, but it uses the mechanics of the free market competition and choice to ensure the delivery of that service is efficient.
That's a perfect encapsulation of their whole philosophy.
Mhm.
Additionally, the manifesto includes an initiative called School to Sports.
Yes, transforming educational institutions into hubs for athletic development. It recognizes that physical development and organized sports are not just extracurricular activities.
Right.
They are deeply tied to national pride, youth engagement, and keeping the younger generation invested in their communities.
Okay, we've covered an immense amount of ground. We've explored the digital space, the economic strategies, and the radical social reforms. But a nation is ultimately a physical place.
Yes, it is.
So for Section 5, we have to ask, what does this Nepal 2.0 actually look like in the physical world? If the RSP manages to survive the pushback and execute this manifesto, how does the landscape change for the citizen walking down the street?
Let's start with the most intimate physical infrastructure a state provides: healthcare.
Crucial.
They promise universal basic healthcare for all citizens. But true to their tech-forward, data-driven nature, they don't just promise more hospitals, they promise that the entire system will be anchored by a unified national digital health record system.
Which solves a massive logistical nightmare. In many fragmented systems, your medical history is lost in a physical filing cabinet in a clinic you visited 5 years ago.
Okay.
Under their proposal, your data follows you securely. Any doctor, in any hospital, anywhere in the country, can instantly and securely pull up your history, your allergies, your past surgeries, and your current medications. It eliminates redundant testing and prevents fatal medical errors.
Beyond the digital framework, the manifesto makes very specific, highly localized physical pledges. For example, they explicitly promise free, state-funded treatment for severe burns.
You know, that specific detail really stood out to me. In a document talking about $100 billion economies and digital nomads, pausing to guarantee free burn treatment is incredibly specific. Why highlight that?
It shows that their policy writers are looking closely at the granular, painful realities of the poorest citizens.
Okay.
In many developing nations, especially in rural or impoverished areas where open fires, unsafe gas cylinders, or rudimentary stoves are used for daily cooking and heating, severe burns are devastatingly common.
Ah, I see.
And treating severe burns is incredibly expensive. It requires highly specialized long-term care, and it routinely bankrupts families. By highlighting this, the RSP is proving they aren't just focused on macroeconomics. They understand the specific physical vulnerabilities of their populace.
That's a really powerful point. They pair that with promises for universally free ambulance services, removing the financial hesitation in a life-or-death emergency.
Right.
They also place a major modern focus on establishing mental health hotlines and robust disability rehabilitation centers. It is a very holistic, modern view of public health.
Moving from the human body to the macro infrastructure, the manifesto proposes a radical shift in how capital is deployed. They want to move entirely away from scattered, politically motivated micro-projects.
We've all seen those. A politician secures funding to build a tiny, poorly constructed, ultimately useless road in their specific district just to appease a local donor or secure a block of votes.
It is a massive bleed of national resources.
The RSP pledges to stop that bleed and focus state capital strictly on mega signature projects. They talk about creating integrated economic corridors alongside those 30,000 kilometers of new highways they promised.
And the concept of an economic corridor means the highway isn't just a strip of asphalt for transport. It is planned as a central spine.
Right.
Alongside the highway, you zone for industrial parks, agricultural processing centers, and specialized housing. The infrastructure drives the economy rather than just reacting to it.
And when we look at urban development and the immediate environment, they're pushing hard for integrated, smart public transport systems.
The electric blue buses.
Yes. The manifesto specifically targets the chaotic, polluted transport network we saw in the opening mural. They explicitly promise to break the existing transport syndicates, the cartels that control the routes and keep prices high and quality low, and introduce fleets of modern electric blue buses.
It directly addresses the suffocating pollution of Kathmandu and other urban centers. They are tying urban mobility inextricably to environmental sustainability.
And this falls under a broader, more aggressive international policy stance they call climate justice.
Climate justice is a fascinating framing.
It is.
Because Nepal is disproportionately violently affected by global climate change. They are facing melting Himalayan glaciers, erratic and destructive monsoon patterns, and severe agricultural disruption.
You're right.
Yet their own national carbon footprint is statistically minuscule. Climate justice suggests they intend to aggressively use diplomatic channels to hold the massive, industrialized international community accountable and demand support, while simultaneously ensuring their own domestic infrastructure is as green as possible.
A critical component of that domestic adaptation is housing. Due to the extreme topography, a significant portion of rural housing in Nepal is scattered widely across steep, unsafe hillsides.
Yeah, the terrain is brutal.
These isolated homes are highly vulnerable to earthquakes, landslides, and floods, and it is logistically impossible for the state to efficiently run water, electricity, and internet lines to every single scattered home.
So the manifesto proposes a controversial solution: building disaster-resilient, unified settlements.
What does that mean exactly?
The strategy involves moving populations from these scattered, high-risk, isolated areas into strategically planned, dense, scientifically vetted, safe communities.
Okay.
Once the population is unified, it becomes vastly cheaper and more efficient for the government to provide top-tier utilities, modern schools, and fully equipped hospitals.
Okay. I understand the logistical efficiency of unified settlements perfectly. It makes sense on a spreadsheet.
But again, you're pushing back on the human element.
Yes, people have deep generational spiritual ties to their ancestral lands, even if that land is on a dangerous hillside. Using state power to relocate communities into standardized unified settlements is going to require immense delicacy, or it risks looking like authoritarian overreach.
It is a massive challenge of persuasion. They have to convince the citizen that the safety and the modern amenities of the new settlement outweigh the ancestral connection to the old land.
To protect the landscape further, they outline strict land use policies. They take a hard legislative stance against the chaotic, unregulated extraction of riverbeds.
The aggressive mining of sand and gravel by local mafias, basically.
Exactly, which completely destroys the local ecology and alters river flows. They also propose strict zoning laws to stop the fragmentation of vital, fertile agricultural land for quick real estate speculation.
Right. They want to protect the farmland to ensure long-term domestic food security while deliberately concentrating urban growth into denser areas.
Finally, we must look at how they plan to physically interface with the rest of the world, which is tourism. Nepal already possesses a world-famous tourism brand centered around Mount Everest and high-altitude trekking.
But the RSP Manifesto makes it clear they want to rapidly evolve beyond just basic physical mountaineering.
They want to diversify the portfolio into high-value cultural and digital tourism.
They specifically mandate the promotion and development of key cultural sites. The Ram Janaki marriage site, Lumbini, which is the birthplace of Buddha, and the Pashupatinath temple complex.
They are recognizing the massive, largely untapped economic potential of organized religious and cultural pilgrimage. You have hundreds of millions of potential tourists in neighboring countries like India, China, and across Southeast Asia who view these sites as deeply sacred.
Huge market.
Huge. If you build the high-speed rail, the secure payment gateways, and the luxury accommodations, you create a massive sustainable revenue stream that doesn't rely on people physically climbing a mountain.
And they want to pair that cultural heritage with cutting-edge, high-tech infrastructure. The document proposes establishing an international standard mountain tech hub.
Furthermore, they want to create a globally recognized high-altitude sports training ecosystem.
Oh, imagine the economic multiplier effect of that.
Right. They want Olympic athletes, marathon runners, and professional sports teams from around the world flying into Nepal, not just for a 2-week vacation, but to live and train for months at high altitudes in state-of-the-art, digitally connected sports facilities.
It is an incredibly ambitious, multi-layered vision for the physical space of the country.
I want to bring all of this directly back to you, the listener. Take a moment to imagine the daily reality this manifesto is trying to pitch.
Victor,
Imagine living in a city where your comprehensive health records follow you digitally and seamlessly from the local clinic to the national hospital. Your daily commute is on an integrated, entirely electric public transport network that runs exactly on time, tracked by a reliable app.
sounds pretty good.
Your local government operates on a strict, legally enforced, no-line online basis, completely free of corrupt middlemen demanding bribes. The electricity powering your home and your internet comes partly from the solar panels on your own roof, and the state actually pays you for your surplus.
It is a highly localized, culturally specific vision designed for Nepal, but structurally, it directly mirrors the best practices and the operational efficiency of top-tier global cities like Singapore, Tallinn, or Tokyo.
It really represents the ultimate synthesis. It attempts to take the very specific, deep-rooted local needs of a developing nation and answer them using the most advanced, globally proven technological standards.
So, as we pull back and look at the entire mural we started with, what does this all mean?
We are at the end of our deep dive into the Bacha Patra 2079. Let's synthesize the gravity of what we've read today.
The sheer, unadulterated ambition of this document is just staggering. It is not just a list of minor political tweaks.
Right.
It is an exhaustive, interconnected blueprint that attempts to marry the agility, the aggressive disruption, and the tech-forward thinking of a Silicon Valley startup with the heavy, complex, moral responsibilities of a democratic welfare state.
It meticulously leverages the deep, boiling historical frustration of Gen Z and the youth. It seeks to weaponize the capital, the skills, and the external perspective of a massive global diaspora.
Right.
And it relies entirely on the promise of digital innovation to propel a nation from a struggling, remittance-based economy into a $100 billion corruption-free powerhouse.
So why should you care about this document, even if you have absolutely no personal or business connection to Nepal?
Because whether you work in international business, whether you're developing new technology, or whether you are just deeply fascinated by the mechanics of human organization, this manifesto is an absolute masterclass in modern political branding, systems thinking, and audacious goal setting.
It asks the ultimate defining question of modern governance. Can a country be explicitly managed out of poverty through sheer administrative will, absolute digital transparency, and technological leapfrogging?
By framing their platform as a legally binding contract, they are attempting to replace the old, tired political rhetoric of vague ideology with a new, ruthless rhetoric of efficiency, metrics, and guaranteed delivery.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends.
Over the last 2 decades, we have watched agile, aggressive startups completely disrupt massive global industries. We've watched them fundamentally change how we hail a cab, how we book a hotel, how we consume media, and how we move money.
The disruption is real.
But can you truly fundamentally disrupt a sovereign nation using those exact same principles?
When the pristine, digitally native, mathematically perfect idealism of a brilliantly written manifesto finally collides with the messy, deeply analog reality of entrenched geopolitics, human greed, and decades of historical baggage. Which one bends first?
Do the sledgehammers ultimately break the wall, or does the sheer density of the wall eventually break the sledgehammers? Think about that mural.
It is a profound structural question that only time, immense political pressure, and ruthless execution will be able to answer.
Keep diving deep, questioning the systems around you, and demanding the math. We'll catch you on the next one.